Talks are in limbo among major players on denuclearizing North Korea since the fall of the Hanoi summit between Pyeongyang and Washington in February. Efforts to revive the nuclear dialogue continue, however, with South Korea officially providing millions of dollars in donations and the U.S. leaving the door open for talks. Today, we go in-depth on where we stand on the path towards North Korea's denuclearization. For that, Dr. Myong-hyun from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies now joins me in the studio. Thank you, as always, for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
Look, South Korean government has officially begun the procedures of over $8 million of donation to North Korea through international organizations, while also separately seeking to provide food aid. What do you think is South Korean government's intention of separately seeking food aid?
Well, clearly using the multilateral organizations such as WFP or FAO to assist North Korea in the humanitarian domain is the best option for any country, including South Korea. But I think the South Korean government is actually focused on the political value of assisting North Korea directly with food aid. I think the symbolism of South Korea helping North Korea with rice especially carries a lot of impact among the South Korean public especially. So I think that's the reason why South Korean government wants to be seen again in the driver's seat, managing the relations with North Korea and portray that inter-Korean relations is above and beyond the upswings in the denuclearization negotiation between Pyongyang and Washington. I think that's the reason why the South Korean government is so attached to the idea of providing direct assistance to North Korea.
Specific details are yet to be announced on how the food aid will be delivered to the North, except for President Moon Jae-in briefly mentioning about the rice surplus here in South Korea. What would be the most appropriate way of providing food aid to North Korea?
Well, there are several ways of providing aid to North Korea. I just mentioned two ways. One is the multilateral approach, using the UN agencies already operating on the ground in North Korea, and the other one is a direct approach. And I would say, given the experience we had helping North Korea a humanitarian way for several decades by now, that one of the biggest concerns that the international donors have when they assist North Korea with food assistance or medical assistance is the fear of diversion of aid by the North Korean regime, or like the problem of accessibility, whether the food or other humanitarian assistance that we provide to North Korea actually reach the people in need. So, and the WFP, the World Food Program, and the other UN agencies and other international NGOs that are currently operating in North Korea have years of experience in trying to mitigating this, the fear, the risk of aid diversion. So they have already people on the ground, they have experience dealing with the North Korean officials. So probably that's the best way to handle this issue. But the reason why South Korean government is willing to, the reason the South Korean government insists on providing direct aid is again for the political reasons, but it carries a lot of downside, especially if you want to provide North Korea with rice. Unlike any other part of the world, maybe in most developed world, food, especially rice, is actually can be monetized in North Korea. So in a way, providing North Korea with rice is tantamount to providing North Korean regime with money. So that's just some fear that many outside observers have about direct assistance. So I think the preponderance of evidence indicates that we should actually rely on the multilateral agency in helping North Korea.
North Korea's reaction to South Korea's offer for humanitarian aid wasn't that friendly so far. It has rather criticized Seoul for just focusing on food aid and instead of looking into other more important matters. And very contrary to this attitude, North Korea recently said that it agrees to form a unified team for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Why the two approaches? What do you make of that?
Well, so going back again to the attributes of assisting North Korea with food, it actually goes against the North Korea's regime's own claim about their successful attainment of self-sufficiency in food production. So when South Korea offers North Korea rice, it actually undermines the North Korean regime's own claim that they don't need food assistance anymore, that they have achieved self-sufficiency in rice production. So in a way, for North Korean regime then, to accept a large-scale food assistance from North Korea would actually undermine its own logic. So I think there's the reason there for North Korean regime to turn down the offer of food assistance to North Korea. On the other hand, forming a unified team, especially to participate in the upcoming Tokyo Olympics in 2020, as actually a different purpose, serves different purpose for the North Korean regime. I think one major way that North Korean regime could use this opportunity, the upcoming opportunity in 2020, is to use it as a way to modulate the possibility of tension coming back to the Korean Peninsula, like like we have observed in the early 2018 with the Pyeongyang Olympics. So given the situation and the negotiation between Pyongyang and Washington, essentially there's no negotiation going on, there's an impasse, and there's some fear that the North Korean regime is readying itself to go back to the provocation cycle that we have seen in 2016 and 2017 period. So if North Korea is about to embark on another cycle of provocation, then by 2020, the chances that there will be high tension in the Korean Peninsula. So in that sense, if North Korea can use another sport event like Olympics as a way to get out of the provocation cycle or to lower down the tension level in the Korean Peninsula, then they'll definitely use it. So I think they're using the opportunity of a unified team as an insurance policy, so to speak.
Another disharmony between U.S. President Trump and his foreign policy aides. President Trump, during his visit to Japan, said that he doesn't think North Korea's latest missile launches are a violation of UN resolutions, but his national security advisor, John Bolton, as well as acting defense chief Patrick Shanahan, have said that it is indeed a violation of the UN resolutions. What does this dual policy imply?
Well, we have seen this kind of disagreement between President Trump and his advisors going back to the March of 2018, when President Trump surprisingly took the offer to meet, face-to-face with Kim Jong-un. So, I mean, since then, the American officials have been in disagreement with their president regarding how to approach North Korea diplomatically. So in that sense, there's no lack of consistency among the U.S. officials when it comes to North Korea. They've been very consistent. They've been always warning about North Korea, always violating UN sanctions, always trying to find a way out of the sanctions regime. So they've been very consistent in that regard. So only factor here is actually President Trump himself. I mean, President Trump is clearly has a different objective in mind beyond the applying pressure on North Korea and then to completely denuclearize North Korea in short term. I think he understands there's some political value in being seen with Kim Jong-un face to face, and then I'm sure that goes both for the domestic audience and the international audience and his own reputation. So I don't think he's willing to somehow give up the opportunity or the possibility of having another meeting with Kim Jong-un. I mean, after all, he carries a lot of high rating back home on television and otherwise. So I think he wants to keep that possibility in reserve at least, and that means that he'll take the risk of being seen contradicting his own officials and therefore confusing the rest of the international community.
And you think that is the main reason why U.S. President Trump is siding with North Korea, despite being at odds with his own aides, as well as Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe?
Well, there's some cynicism in my remarks just now. But then, again, I think President Trump believes that having a diplomatic solution with the North Korean leader actually serves his own political needs, but also a larger purpose of bringing stability back to the region and maybe solving the North Korea's nuclear crisis once and for all. But then again, but the U.S. officials also are claiming that they want to solve the North Korean nuclear crisis. So it's really about methodology at the moment. And then only difference I see between the U.S. officials and President Trump is that U.S. President Trump is elected, and he actually has to look at the political dynamics of the situation.
North Korea on Monday, through its state media, said any projectile, when fired, draws a trajectory. And so banning ballistic technology is equal to banning a sovereignty. Is the North Korean regime implying that it fired a ballistic missile?
Oh, of course. I mean, I think they are definitely saying it. I think they've been avoiding explicitly saying that it was a ballistic missile launch, obviously because they're worried, because the languages of the UN sanctions resolutions actually says that they are sanctioning North Korea on the ground that North Korea carried out either a ballistic missile test or the nuclear test. So in this case, clearly North Korea understands that they are not ready for now to essentially confirm the hardliners' fears both in Washington and Seoul that they are actually embarked on another cycle of provocation with ballistic missile launches. But then again, we know that technically speaking, North Koreans just said the truth. Any projectile, any missile that goes up actually has like a ballistic trajectory. So in that sense, they launched tested a ballistic missile. But then I think they said they only came up with this statement after there's been some disagreement in Seoul and Washington about the nature of North Korea's recent provocations. So probably they feel that it's actually safe for them to say this now after North Korea, Seoul and Washington have come up with a position regarding the interpretation of the North Korean tests.
Taking into account next year's U.S. presidential election, doesn't Trump need to achieve more on North Korea's denuclearization? North Korea has made it clear that it wants to see some progress by the end of this year. But what do you think Trump has in mind regarding the time frame of North Korea's denuclearization?
Well, I think President Trump has a little bit of a different perspective from the rest of us. Especially people in Seoul think that this current situation, the status quo, is actually not a good thing. Currently there's no progress whatsoever between Pyongyang and Washington regarding denuclearization, despite the fact that the leaders have met twice already. But then I think from the perspective of President Trump, the status quo is actually not a bad thing. He said it several times in public that the fact that nothing is happening in the Korean Peninsula is actually good news, and he actually chalked it up as his own personal achievement that none of his predecessors have been able to do. So I think he's actually pretty happy with the lack of progress or lack of provocations coming from North Korea at the moment. So I think North Korea understands this is a dilemma for them, not for President Trump. So they are trying to make that dilemma not theirs anymore, but then President Trump's dilemma by threatening to re-embark on the provocation cycle. But then I think President Trump believes that, probably he has a very strong feeling about this, regardless of what his advisors are telling him, that the Kim Jong-un is going to abide by the promise of not launching any provocation for now. So I think President Trump thinks that the wind is blowing in his favor rather now. So I think that's the reason why he's actually quite happy with the content of the current situation.
Meanwhile, Japan is actively seeking a summit with North Korea. Reports say that Japan will hold talks with North Korean officials early next month in Mongolia. What do you think Japan is aiming for?
Well, I think I think that there's the strategic objective of the Japanese government of expressing this kind of intention to have an unconditional meeting with Kim Jong-un is that I think it's twofold. There's a practical purpose of trying to solve the abduction issue that actually is a very important issue on the Japanese government's domestic political agenda. But on the other hand, also this serves the purpose of somehow influencing South Korean action in an indirect way. I think the South Korean government has got all the credit for being one of the most important conduit or channel of communication between the international community and Pyongyang. And at the same time, South Korea was seen as actually excluding Japan from this communication with Kim Jong-un. But I think that Japan can claim that they can now bypass South Korea in establishing a direct channel of communication with Pyongyang. And I think it also serves a North Korean purpose that North Korea has multiple different ways of leverages, I would say, in trying to control the situation in the Korean Peninsula. So I think it actually sends a very strong message to Seoul, both from Pyongyang and Tokyo, that both sides, meaning Japan and North Korea, are willing to set up a direct channel of communication bypassing South Korea at the same time. So I would say this statement by the Japanese government has puts a lot of focus on Seoul rather than Pyongyang, in my opinion.
So Japan wants to gain some kind of leverage by engaging in talks with North Korea. What kind of reaction do you expect from North Korea, though? do you think North Korea would want to have a summit with Japan?
So the fear that many people, especially in Japan, had up until actually earlier this year was that if North Korea is ever willing to sit down with Prime Minister Abe and discuss about the important matters, such meeting will be purely transactional, meaning that North Korea will only come to the meeting with the Japanese counterpart for some sort of economic gain. I mean, some sort of promise being made by the Japanese government to assist North Korea economically. So essentially, North Korea could offer some more evidence or proof that about the abduction issue, and in exchange, Japan could offer North Korea essentially like relaxing sanctions or offering some sort of monetary incentive to the regime in Pyongyang. But then now the situation has changed quite a bit in the region. I mean, I think North Korea understands that having allowing South Korea monopolize some of the relationship between North Korea and the Western countries has not really served North Korean interests really well. So maybe North Korea can have a meeting with the Japanese government, and therefore this meeting alone could serve the purpose of sending very strong message to both Seoul and Washington that that North Korea can get out of the diplomatic isolation, and also can somehow establish different understanding with other countries in the region, which therefore actually undermine the level of pressure that's being applied in North Korea right now.
All right, Dr. Go, thank you for your insights today.
My pleasure.
And that does it for this edition of News in Depth from all of us here at Arirang. Thank you for watching.